Um, so, a few announcements. Obviously, problem set 10 is due today. Problem set 11 is optional. Let me just be clear what I mean by that. I mean that you don't have to turn it in and it's not going to be graded. But it's not canceled in the sense that you should do it anyway. And the solutions will be available. I can't remember when I said I would. I've got them set up on bspace to post automatically at a certain point in time. Basically, problem set 11 is practice with the level K model of bounded rationality. And I'm actually going to give you the first part of it today, but the rest of it is more interesting. So it's good practice, and you should do it as, if nothing else, as practice problems. So I'll do an exam review session a week from today, here, same time, as regular lecture, and then the exam as hopefully by now. I'm not sure, how are students supposed to know where exams are? Am I supposed to tell you just magically, you have some inner compass? Anyway, this is where it is. It's in Bechtel Auditorium. I've never done an exam in Bechtel Auditorium. I don't know what that's going to be like, but hopefully it'll be okay. You guys, just raise your hand if you don't know where that is. Oh, okay. Well, maybe between now and maybe I'll post a map or something like that. I mean, obviously you can find it yourselves, but it's next door to or upstairs or downstairs from the engineering library, which is in that weird underground building right next to Evans Hall. Okay, so today I'm going to finish up very briefly talking about social preferences in labor markets, which is what I got cut off talking about last time, and then we'll finally at last start talking about behavioral game theory. Oops. Okay, and I think I've got this. Yes, I've got the Zoom set so that these things don't wobble around. Okay, so social preferences in labor markets are sort of an important topic, partly for labor economists, but actually more importantly for macroeconomists who care a lot about unemployment, right? I mean, the two things that macroeconomists care about are unemployment and inflation, thank you, and the seeming trade-off between the two. We like low inflation, we like low unemployment, but it's very hard to get those two things at the same time. And so there are all kinds of interesting puzzles in labor economics that have implications for macroeconomics, and in particular, sort of puzzles about unemployment. Unemployment is a condition in which the labor market does not clear. I drew this diagram last time. You have supply and demand for labor, and in a market clearing equilibrium, there will certainly be people who are not employed, but there will be nobody who is willing to work at the prevailing wage who's not employed. Right? All the people in the supply curve who are willing to work for the prevailing wage are here, and in a market clearing equilibrium, they're all employed. So these people are what is politely referred to as not in the labor force, which is different from being unemployed, technically. So what we actually think we observe is that the prevailing wage is somewhere above the sort of reservation wage of the last person on the supply curve, right? So that what actually we think we observe is a situation where the actual wage is there, and then there are all of these people. We refer to these people as surplus, and they refer to themselves as unemployed. And then and the problem gets worse in recessions, right? And the problem gets worse, curiously, in recessions. So we don't know why this seems to be true almost all the time, unless the economy is really screaming. And we don't know why. And then in recessions, it's even worse because in recessions, right, something like demand shrinks. And you would expect that even if there was some gap between the market clearing wage and the prevailing wage in the market, that when demand goes down, that gap might stay there, but you'd still expect the prevailing wage to go down. And in many cases, it doesn't. So social preferences have been sort of put forward as explanations for both of these phenomena. In the case of sort of wages not going down in recessions, there's this idea that people have different ideas about what's fair and what's not fair, sort of in a kind of reference-dependent way. The idea is that firms have some kind of baseline profits that they're entitled to, and if you lower wages to protect those profits, that's considered to be fair. But if you just have a short-term surplus because other firms aren't hiring and so there's people out of work, there's a higher level of unemployment, that lowering your wage to take advantage of that short-term surplus and increase your profits is considered to be unfair. And this is sort of put forward as an explanation for what's called wage stickiness in downturns, economic downturns. And then this still leaves the question of why it is that even when times are good, labor markets seem to not clear. We still have people who would be willing to work at the prevailing wage who can't find a job. Willing to work at below the prevailing wage and not able to find a job. And so there are all kinds of models of what are called efficiency wages, the idea that firms would pay above the minimum necessary for one reason or another. And one of the predominant models of efficiency wages, the idea that if you pay people more than you really have to, you can get greater efficiency out of them. And one of these models is put forward by George Akerlof, and it suggests sort of what he actually calls partial gift exchange, that the wage you receive is partly your opportunity cost of the leisure time you have to give up, and it's partly a bit more than that, a gift. There's a bonus piece in your wage, not an actual literal bonus, but that there's part of your hourly or annual wage is more than your opportunity cost, and the firm gives it to you as a gift. Excuse me. Is anybody else experiencing a heightened level of chalk dust, or is it just me? And the idea is that the workers will then provide more than the minimum required effort as a sort of return of the gift, an exchange of gifts. And that you would then see firms, right, in here, these people here would be saying, hey, I'd be willing to take that job for just my opportunity cost of leisure, right? And the firms are saying, no, I'm not willing to pay you less, even though you're willing to accept less in order to come and take this job. I'm not willing to pay you less because you won't, I won't get that gift exchange benefit out of you in that case. All of which is just so that I can show you another interesting experiment. Ernst Fair, who is a Swiss. I always used to think people from Switzerland were called Swiss people, but it turns out they're called Swiss. So Ernst Fair is a Swiss and an absolutely lovely man. And he does these lab experiments. He was also involved, I believe, in the bicycle messenger experiment that we saw. He's into experimental labor markets. So that's a real world labor market field experiment. And then he does these things where he sort of creates faux labor markets in the lab. Typically no actual work gets done. But people are offered the opportunity to engage into contracts where, for example, in this case, certain players are assigned to be firms, and they make quote-unquote wage offers. this is how much I'm willing to give you if you will agree to sign up for my contract. And then the players who are assigned to be workers decide first whether or not to accept any given contract, right? So there'll be a bunch of different players who are firms making different wage offers in this so-called market, and then there's a whole bunch of players who are playing workers who decide which offers they want to take. And then once the firms of workers have entered into a contract with a quote-unquote firm, they will then choose what effort level, and they lose some tokens in order to provide a higher effort level, and then the firm actually makes, the firm player makes a higher payoff if the worker chooses a higher effort level. And they do these three different treatments. So in the first one, it was just bilateral negotiations. There was no market. People were placed together in pairs. One of them was the firm, one of them was the worker. Okay? So there was no competition. But the effort level was endogenous, meaning that the worker was choosing the effort level as I just described. Then they had a full-blown market where the firms and workers weren't paired up beforehand, but chose each other on the basis of whether or not they liked the available offers. And as I described, the workers then chose their effort level. And then they did another version where they said, okay, we're going to let you compete. We're going to let the firms compete for workers, and the workers compete with each other to get jobs. But the effort level is going to be fixed. Okay? So it was just sort of ruling out the possibility of any kind of gift exchange. So treatment number 1 rules out competition, and treatment number 3 rules out gift exchange. And what the point of the experiment is to see sort of Akerlof's the standard sort of neoclassical response to Akerlof is, if any firm was dumb enough to do that, some other firm, or if any worker was dumb enough to agree to that, some other set of workers and firms in a competitive market would drive that nonsense behavior out. All those crazy social preferences would be squeezed out of the market. And so what these guys are doing is they're trying to say, let's find out, at least in a laboratory mock-up of a labor market, does competition actually squeeze out social preferences? So the first thing they've got to show is that, sorry, I've got way too much stuff going on here. This is the thing they think most looks like the real world, right? The first thing they have to be able to say is that the wage offers made in that setting are in fact higher than the market clearing wages, right? So that treatment 2 is going to get us this, the prevailing wage when firms and workers are allowed to do whatever they want. What market 3 does, roughly speaking, is it says, if we eliminate the possibility for any kind of efficiency wages or gift exchange, what's the market clearing wage that just gets that the minimum the firms need to pay in order to get workers to show up at all? And so they want to demonstrate first, in the comparison between 2 and 3, that the wages you see in the most realistic market, treatment 2, are in fact above sort of market clearing wages. And then they want to eliminate competition and see whether or not, whether it's different, whether, in other words, whether you would expect in the bilateral there might be gift exchange because there's no competition to drive it out, and you might expect wages to be higher in treatment 1 than in treatment 2, right? So in the bilateral, in treatment 1, you get gift exchange here, and then you get competition here, and then we don't know whether or not you're going to get gift exchange or not. And then we also want to make sure that here, that the wage you're seeing in market 2 actually is higher than the prevailing wage. And needless to say, because this made its way onto a slide in undergraduate class, the results are exactly what was hypothesized. The wages were highest in treatment 1, slightly lower in treatment 2, and a lot lower in treatment 3. Right? So the comparison between 2 and 3 tells us that, sure enough, in a competitive market where effort level is endogenous, there appears to be some kind of efficiency wage that's above the market clearing. And it doesn't seem to be that, so in comparison between 1 and 2, that going from the bilateral to the competitive framework is not driving out very much of that efficiency wage effect. Not clear whether that tells us anything about the global economy, but it's an interesting way of beginning to get a handle on the impact of social preferences in the real world. Okay. Any questions about any of that? All right. Finally, we're going to start talking about bounded rationality in game theory. Okay, so you should have this list etched in your brain somewhere. These are the components of a game. These are the things that make up a game. You've got a set of players. Each player has a set of strategies, different actions in different rounds of the game. Depending upon the player's strategies, there are payoffs, right? Those are sort of like the bottom of the tree, or the numbers in the matrix. And then there's some assumptions that are made about what information the different players have. For example, players might be of different types, and they might know each other's type or they might not. Players might know each other's payoffs or they might not, etc. Okay? So these are sort of like the core assumptions that are usually made in standard game theory, and I've talked about these a little bit already. First, that players have purely self-interested preferences, and then that they make correct inferences about probabilities. So probabilities about what? Probabilities about, what's the probability that the person I'm playing against is a nice type versus a not nice type, or is a high ability type versus a low ability type, etc. What kinds of actions? There will be situations in some games where you don't actually know what the other player's action is precisely, even after they've made their action or taken their action. And there will be situations where you don't really know the payoffs, even if you know the other player's type and the other player's actions, you don't actually know the payoffs because there may be various different states of the world. It might be a wet day or a dry day, etc., and so you may not actually know the payoffs. And so in game theory, there's an enormous amount of probability inference that goes on because there's all these different dimensions of uncertainty, and the assumption is always made in standard game theory that people have correct inferences about probabilities. Okay? So, and then they have unlimited capacity for reasoning, for strategic reasoning, right? Sort of chess player reasoning. If I do this, what will my opponent do in response to that, given what they know I might do in response to their move, etc., etc. Okay, so we've already talked about these things. We've talked about social preferences. We've also talked about lots of other kinds. I mean, if you think about it, game theory, game theory shouldn't really be thought of as a subset of microeconomics. It really should be thought of as, in some sense, a superset, because everything that we've said about preferences can be stuck into a game, right? Because the payoffs that people receive are always the output of some utility function, right? And so a lot of times you'll see a game, in some extremely simplified game, where, you just have x and y and z and q and whatever, and they're just numbers, and you're told these are the payoffs. And you're seldom told what units they're in. We usually think that they're in dollar terms, but usually, technically what we're usually doing here is we're saying these are utils, okay? And then we'll call a util is equal to a dollar, which is to say that we treat dollars as quasi-linear. Or rather, we treat preferences over dollars as quasi-linear. And we don't talk much about the utility function. We've talked a little bit about utility function in game theory with social preferences, but you could take any of the other complications of the utility function that we talked about this semester and jam them into a game and just say, well, this player has reference dependent preferences, and this player has some beta delta preferences, and whatever else. Okay, we've also talked at some length about probability inference. And I think what I want to say about that is, because I'm gearing up to sort of come back around to an overview of the course on Thursday, right? So we talked about rational preferences, or you could just think more generally of non-standard preferences, whether they wind up violating the assumption of rationality or not. And we've talked about rational expectations. And we've talked about sort of unbounded, what I'll call computational rationality. Now, a point I want to make here sort of along the way, since we're on this slide, all the stuff we did about probability inference actually kind of, it can be thought of as kind of spanning these two. Right? Because, and we talked about this quite a lot, different people brought things up, and raised their hands and brought things up at different times to sort of say, well, is the problem really that people don't or can't do the math, or is it just that they're not thinking like that at all? Right? And so you can think about the issue of bounded versus unbounded computational rationality in the context of quasi-Bayesian probability inference. There are situations, and I sort of said this a number of times, there are situations where manifestly people should be using Bayes' rule because the stakes are really high and they're supposed to be trained in it, and we see that they don't in some cases. And so we can sort of say manifestly that this is a situation where circumstances call for explicit computation and people either can't or don't do it. But you can also simply say that regardless of whether what's going on is a failure of math per se or a failure of computational reasoning, regardless of whether that's what's going on or whether it's just that people aren't thinking about Bayes' rule at all. They're just like the stories we talk about, you know, if you hear a growl in the woods, you have to decide whether it's a wild boar or just a hedgehog, right? And whether or not unbounded rationality is at stake, it's still going to be the case that if people get probability inferences wrong for any reason, whether it's some evolutionary psychology story, they're going to wind up with some failure of rational expectations, right? Because rational expectations means that while you might not know the exact outcome of some uncertain process, you do know the distribution of probabilities correctly. And exactly what we have said about probability inference is that for one reason or another, whether it's because of some kind of computational limitation or not, people don't compute those probabilities right, so how could they possibly have the right distribution of probabilities in mind when they make choices? Okay. Now we're going to talk about this assumption of unbounded rationality. And it comes up, I was about to say it comes up most problematically in game theory. I don't know if that's true or not. It comes up in game theory in a way that is unique to game theory. And so we're going to address it in that context. Okay, so here's an example. This will motivate the main model of bounded rationality in game theory. So this is a game called the P-Beauty Contest. And it's based on a statement, and I can't remember where this is from, of John Maynard Keynes, who had a relatively jaundiced view of private investors in stock markets. And he talked about how his impression of the way people pick stocks is that, you know, it's not just that they're trying to, he said it seems sometimes as if people are just trying to pick the prettiest stock, right, on some basis that they don't know. But actually, what's really going on, which is so much more problematic, isn't that people are trying to guess the prettiest stock. It's that they're trying to guess what other people will have guessed the prettiest stock is, right? And that really, if they're at all sophisticated, what they're really trying to do is to figure out what people will have guessed other people will have guessed the prettiest stock will be. And you can see that this is just an infinite regress. And so you get into this thing where basically everybody's just trying to game the market and nobody's actually paying attention to the fundamentals anymore. So here's a situation like that. Everybody picks a number between between 0 and 100. And then the rules of the game are announced in advance. You're all going to submit a number, and then I'm going to take all your numbers and I'm going to find the average. And the person whose number is closest to 2/3 of the average gets a prize, whatever prize it might be. And so that 2/3 is p, and it can vary, but for some reason it seems that it's most frequently implemented with p equals 2/3. Okay. This turns out, so to find the Nash equilibrium, it turns out we can use iterated deletion of dominated strategies, IDDS. That acronym will come up again later in the lecture. Okay, in the first round of deletion of dominated strategies, players with their heads screwed on tightly will observe that the maximum possible y bar is 100. If everybody, for some bizarre reason, wrote down 100, that's the highest that y bar, the average, could possibly be. So obviously, any y that is less than 2/3 of that is to say less than 66 2/3, dominates any y that's above. So nobody in their right mind, nobody who is computationally unimpaired, would choose to write anything down above 66 2/3. Iterating that thought process, we can also say that now means that the maximum possible is 66 2/3, which means the maximum possible prize payoff target is 44 4/9, right? 2/3 of that max. And so anything above 44 4/9 is now dominated. So no fool would reasonably guess anything above 44 4/9. Right? So by the same logic, you can figure out that in round n, anything below 2/3 to the n times 100 dominates anything above. And then as n goes to infinity, you get the Nash equilibrium, which is that everybody guesses 0. Right? It's perfectly obvious. It's not what people do. This is an implementation of this in a UC Berkeley undergraduate class. Now, in fairness, these students were not given an enormous amount of time to think about their answers, which might have affected things. Particularly, it affects things if we care about the difference between whether or not people's intuitive answer can be modeled by a model that assumes unbounded rationality versus they actually do the computations. Right? The story, what we care about is whether they do the math. Right? So you could think of something interesting. I just thought of this. Someone should write this down. You could see how people's answers, I assume this has been done. See how people's answers vary depending upon how much time you give them would be a way to look at whether or not the story is about doing the math or not. Anyway, there's 0, there's 100, and these two spikes are the modal answers, right? About 33 and about 22.